The most unexplained, mysterious disappearances in the Bitterroot region, Montana. 6 people have disappeared in Bitterroot. None have been found. None left any trace. And the worst part, authorities cannot solve these disappearances. These people were not in war zones. They were on trails at campsites near home. They knew where they were. They had experience, but they vanished. No blood, no screams, no objects left behind. Some vanished in front of witnesses, others in accessible locations. The forest there holds something no one can explain. And today I will show you how it all happened. Something is very wrong in Bitterroot, and no one knows what until they do not want to say. Are you ready? Then put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and hide well under the blanket, because now the mystery begins. Let's go. Michael. Michael, is that you? Susan Adams, 1990. Susan Adams, 1990. The footprints that stopped, it was supposed to be just a short walk, a few minutes maybe, just enough to watch some bird before the coffee got cold. On September 30th, 1990, Susan Adams, 42 years old from Austin, Texas, left the campsite where she was staying with her husband and a group from Iron Horse Outfitters in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness between Idaho and Montana. She carried only a camera, a pair of binoculars, and light clothing. No food, no survival gear, and no intention of staying long. But Susan never came back. Her husband noticed her absence just minutes later. Concerned, he followed her trail. The footprints were there, clearly visible in the soft earth of the meadow. They went on for about 20 m, and then they simply stopped. There were no signs of return, no turning around, no signs of confusion or struggle. Susan's footprints ended in the middle of the trail, as if she had vanished into thin air. It is an unusual pattern, but not a unique one in similar documented cases in the Bitterroot region. As analyzed by investigations like the missing 411 series, the abrupt end of footprints with no transition to other terrain or signs of vertical movement, such as a fall, defies all human logic of movement. Nothing in the landscape indicated a trap, hole, or natural obstacle. It was as if the world had simply forgotten to continue beneath her feet. A search was immediately organized. Search dogs, helicopters, and dozens of volunteers combed every inch of the area. They walked side by side, eyes sharp, in tactical formations. Nothing was found. No sign of fall, no drop of blood, no clothing, nothing. It is important to remember Susan was not inexperienced. She was a nature lover used to hiking and camping. She was with an organized group in a region that, although wild, was well known and relatively well monitored by outdoor enthusiasts, and still she vanished without a single sound. The group was only a few meters from the spot where she was last seen, but no one saw anything. No one heard anything. For many investigators, what makes this case so disturbing is not just the absence of clues. It is the way nature seemed to collaborate in the disappearance, as if it closed in around her. As if instead of getting lost, Susan had been removed, subtracted. Weather conditions quickly changed. Snow and cold forced a temporary suspension of the search. When the effort resumed, the landscape had already changed. Even with renewed investigation and more resources, no evidence was found. Hope gave way to frustration and then to silence. Susan Adams's case received national attention for a brief period. It appeared in local news reports, missing persons programs, and police archives. But like so many others, it faded away. With no body, no clue, no confirmed crime, there was little that could be done. The case was filed away, never closed, never solved. The pattern seen in similar cases is unsettling. People with wilderness experience vanishing in relatively accessible areas under abrupt circumstances, leaving no trace. In some cases, like Susan's, the footprints stopping in the middle of the trail function as a signature of something that does not want to be understood, as if a trail had been deliberately left up to a certain point, and then nothing. Some point to natural possibilities, wild animals, accidental falls, hypothermia. But none of these explain an immediate, silent, and trace-free disappearance. Others suggest human intervention, carefully planned abductions, or crimes. But the environment, the response time, and the absence of signs contradict that hypothesis. And then the unconventional theories emerge. Abductions, portals, unknown natural phenomena, entities operating beyond the visual field, ancient presences that have inhabited the forest since before mankind. Unsettling hypotheses, but not dismissed by those who study the pattern seriously. The Bitterroot Valley, with its massive mountains and deep forests, is a place where cell phone signal disappears, time slows down, and the landscape seems to breathe in silence. A place where the noise of civilization fades away and only the sound of birds and wind remains. A place where sometimes the footprints stop. Susan Adams was never found. Her name remains in the databases. Her family never had a body to bury. Her case remains among the unexplained. Her fixed point in a region that time and again defies logic and hope, because some absences speak louder than presences, and footprints that stop say more than 1,000 clues ever could. The abandoned ATV Ord in 2020, the abandoned ATV and the void. The forest seemed motionless that day, that it was not just the silence. It was the kind of silence that feels like it's holding something, as if it were waiting. June 10th, 2020. Gordon White, 78 years old, left home for a short ATV ride. Familiar route, mild weather, an ordinary day. He left his wallet and phone on the table, said he'd be right back, and never returned. When his wife woke up the next morning and saw that he was still not home, a cold feeling took over the room. She called neighbors, friends. No one had seen him. The search began urgently. The ATV was located shortly after. It was there, carefully parked at the edge of a trail he often used. The vehicle was intact, the tank full. No scratches, no signs of malfunction. It was as if he had simply stopped and disappeared. The seat was still slightly warm according to the first people on scene. But Gordon was nowhere nearby. No trace, no sound, nothing. Search dogs found no trail. Helicopters scanned the area for days. Not a piece of clothing, not a footprint, not the slightest sign of movement. It was as if the world had decided to erase any evidence of Gordon's existence in that place. Local investigators were perplexed. One of them, in an anonymous interview, described a feeling hard to explain. He said that as he approached the spot where the ATV was found, the sound began to fade. It was as if the air was too thick, as if there was a pressure like the place didn't want to be disturbed. He said, a silence that swallows footsteps, that absorbs voices, that silences even the birds. And then came the whispers. Older residents mentioned old stories, local legends. They spoke of a part of the forest known as the Fold, a place where time seemed to twist, where sounds vanished and shadows moved on their own. They said compasses spun there, radios stopped working. They said space itself felt distorted. Gordon never believed in it. He was skeptical, rational. He had heard those stories before. Of course, anyone who lives for decades near the Selway Bitter route cannot escape the legends. But he was not a man easily scared. Yet the coincidences began to pile up. Other reports started to emerge. A hunter who swore he saw a glowing figure between the pines disappearing with a sharp snap. A young man who vanished for hours, and when he returned remembered nothing except being surrounded by a high-pitched sound like twisted metal. A woman who said she heard her brother's name whispered on the breeze 3 days after his disappearance. Gordon became another piece in this sinister pattern, a pattern in which the forest seems to choose, select, and always the same way. Someone vanishes without struggle, without haste, without noise. The world stays the same. Only the absence grows. His family still leaves an empty chair at Sunday lunch, still studies maps, still returns from time to time to that trail. They search for something, a fragment, an explanation, a sign. But the place where the ATV was found is now avoided. Not officially, of course, but everyone knows. A void has settled there. Something that weighs on the shoulders, that itches the skin. A silence thicker than it should be. Gordon White was swallowed by a place that offers no explanation. A terrain that returns machines but keeps men. A point on the map that does not record what it absorbs. And so the question remains always the same. What if he was not the one who left the vehicle? What if something called him? John Walton, 2020 mirrored disappearance. 3 months. Exactly 3 months between the disappearance of Gordon White and the silence that fell over John Walton. Time marked a precise repetition, like an invisible metronome, dictating the rhythm of something no one can see or understand. September 29th, 2020. Arrow, Idaho. The same town, the same trees, the same void. John Walton was 75 years old, lived alone, quiet, methodical, respected. He never wandered far from the trail. He knew the way to the forest and did not trust sunny days or easy paths. He knew where he stepped. He always did. That afternoon, John left home, not by car, not on horseback, not with a backpack or supplies. He took only a gun, crossed the low fence that separated his house from the woods, and vanished among the trees, as if going to meet something or someone. He was never seen again. His truck was in the garage, the horses in the stable, the cupboards untouched, food on the table, the lights still on. Everything as it should be, except for him. Searches began before sunset. Neighbors, the sheriff, volunteers, dogs, drones, nothing. No footprints, no torn fabric, no sound. The trail cameras didn't catch even a shadow. It was as if John had walked out of reality. Not fled, not gotten lost, just disconnected. And soon came the inevitable comparison. Gordon White, gone in June, just a few miles away, similar ages, familiarity with the land, the same kind of calm day, the same kind of clean disappearance, no noise, no trace. The podcast Pacific Northwest Missing Persons Project dedicated an entire episode to what they called the echo of Orofino. 2 men, 3 months, 0 clues. An unsettling question at the end. What if these are not coincidences? What if the forest is choosing? Residents began avoiding trails that had once been part of their daily lives. Hunters changed routes. Some spoke of haunting, others of bad energy, a kind of reversed magnetism, a call that cannot be heard, only felt. Hunters reported sounds, a deep rumble, not from the sky or the treetops, but from the ground, as if something pulsed beneath their feet, vibrated, waited. One spoke of a wrong shadow that moved against the wind that cast no shadow of its own. None of this was made official, but everyone in Orofino heard it. The similarity between the cases goes beyond the dates, goes beyond the roots. What unites them is the absence, the way time seems to bend around the point where they vanished, the way the search finds not even a thread. John did not scream, did not run, did not fall. He simply is not there. And that for many is the most frightening part, because the forest usually returns things, bodies, clues, answers, even when tragic, even when late. But in these cases, there's no return. The question left is another. If 2 men vanished in the same way, so close, so near, and if the forest is not losing people, but collecting, what else does it intend to take? Barbara Bollock, 2007. The Vanishing in Plain Sight. High sun, cloudless sky, clear trail, no obstacles in sight, no plausible excuse. Barbara Bollock, 55 years old, an experienced hiker. She knew every curve of the Bear Creek Overlook, had walked it dozens of times. She was not a reckless adventurer. She was meticulous, discreet, reliable. That morning, she was hiking with a friend named Jim, a visitor from out of town, invited by her to see the mountains. The trail was well marked. No tall brush, no ravines, no apparent risks. They were talking calm. Jim paused just for a minute, maybe less, turned to look at the view. When he turned back, Barbara was no longer there. There was no sound of footsteps, no scream, no noise of fleeing, falling, or struggling. Nothing that disturbed the calm air of the morning. She simply was gone. The space where she had been empty, no sign, no indication, no logic. Jim looked around, called her name, walked a few meters down the trail, nothing. Just a few meters away, but in another world. Search teams arrived quickly. The news spread. Helicopters scanned the region. Dogs tracked the trail, but there was no trail. No footprints, no scent, not a single hair. The dogs stopped. The helicopters saw untouched forest. The trail went straight, but Barbara had vanished. 2 men were reportedly seen on the trail that same day. They were never located. Not that day, not after. It added to the sense of paranoia, but also of pattern. Police investigated Jim. Everyone investigated Jim, but there was nothing. No suspicious behavior, no motive, not even opportunity. The time between him turning his back and her disappearance was so short, so impossible that it did not even allow for a stumble. They talked about predators, but no predator leaves no trace. They talked about accidents, but no accident happens without sound. They talked about a voluntary escape, but who runs away from their own trail in the middle of a normal hike with no backpack, no warning, no rush? Forums like Missing 411 adopted the case as a symbol, a disappearance with a direct witness. The kind of event that tears logic in half. It is not just what vanished. It is what was not left behind because everything should have been there. A body, a footprint, a dropped object, but there was nothing. Only the space where she should have been. The forest, they say, does not hide. It collects and then it silences. And what is frightening in that silence is that it is not empty. It is full of questions that no one can answer. Barbara Bollock was never found. Her name is now part of the sound that cannot be heard. The kind of void that weighs and watches. Ronald Scott Gray, 2008. The disappearance of a man impossible to disappear. September of 2008. Selway, Bitterroot Wilderness, Idaho. Too far for phones, too dense for drones, too wild for questions. Ronald Scott Gray, 62 years old, former Marine, former Massachusetts State Police captain, a man who knew how to survive, who knew what to watch for, what to avoid, and more importantly, knew how not to disappear. But he did. It was his third time entering that part of the forest. A brutal region, inhospitable, but not for him. He was on a hunting expedition with friends. Everything was planned, locations, schedules, codes. On September 23rd, Gray was supposed to meet his group at a campsite. He never showed up. They waited 3 days. There was no way it was just a delay. Not with him. They reported the disappearance. The search began, the kind that leaves no stone unturned. Ground teams, helicopters, search dogs, horses, maps, people with training, with urgency. Nothing. Nothing except his backpack found near Highline Lake resting on the ground. No signs of panic, no scratches, no struggle, no blood, no trace, nothing to indicate pain, fear, or disorder. Just silence. But Ronald Scott Gray was gone. Details came later, disturbing ones. Friends reported changes, subtleties. He seemed distracted, off-plan, returning to old hiding spots unnecessarily, avoiding eye contact, as if something was distracting him, as if he were listening to something else. He was different, but did not seem like fear. It was as if he knew, as if he sensed something, a kind of internal silence, a kind of summoning. The weather turned out of season snow, thick clouds. The wind began to fight the sound. The forest closed its paths. Communication failed. Devices glitched. Footprints vanished before they could be found. One question echoed in the investigators' minds. How does someone like him disappear? No panic, no struggle, no visible mistake. There was no crime, no animal, no failure, just absence. A man who could not disappear disappeared. And worse, he was not the only one. The region already held other cases, less trained people, less prepared. But Ronald was the outlier, the exception. He was the control, the guarantee that this only happened to those who didn't know what they were doing. But Ronald knew and still vanished. The forest, they say, is neutral, but sometimes it chooses. And Ronald Scott Gray was chosen, swallowed, erased, not taken by time or predator, but by something that watches, that tests, that waits, and when it meets resistance, it still takes. Ronald was not the first, but he was the most improbable. And maybe the most frightening, because when the impossible happens to someone who understands the rules, everything you thought you knew no longer applies, and the forest once again goes silent, as if there had never been a man at all. The hunter, the elk, and the shape that should not have been there. The year 2000, somewhere deep in the Bitterroot National Forest, Montana. The exact coordinates no one knows or no one says. The man was a hunter, a trail veteran, solitary by choice. That morning, Before the sun touched the treetops, he took position. He was watching a herd of elk. Absolute silence. The kind of waiting that demands steady nerves and sharp instinct. That's when it happened. It wasn't a sound or a clear sight. It was a displacement, a disturbance. David Paulada, author of the missing 411 series, is the one who reports it. He gives no names, no exact dates, but he describes the scene as one of the most unsettling in all his research. The hunter saw a mass, not a creature, not a figure, a mass, something without defined contours, something that cast no shadow. But that was there, moving quickly toward the elk, and then the disappearance. No one knows if the hunter ran, if he tried to defend himself. There are no reports of a struggle, no scream, no sign of panic, only silence after the shift. The herd scattered, pure instinct. Animals sense what human logic cannot reach. But the man, he did not return. Later they found his original position, the gun on the ground, backpack beside it, nothing out of place, everything tidy, as if he had simply stood up and vanished. There were no tracks, no drag marks, no animal trail, nothing. Polites insist the pattern is always the same. People disappear in wilderness areas and places where they should be easily found. Many times they are found days later, without clothing and locations already searched, or as in this case, never again. What makes this disappearance especially disturbing is the unidentified mass. It's not just the disappearance. It's what was seen before. A shapeless form, a presence without identity, something that should not exist, but was there something the elk sensed before the man did? It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a mountain lion. It wasn't anything the eyes could define. Just a displacement of space, as if the air had collapsed for a moment, as if something had moved too fast between the layers of reality. It is this kind of detail that leads Pites beyond logical explanation. Is this that gives rise to the question no one wants to ask? Is there something dual intelligent behind these disappearances? Because in cases like this, it is not just someone getting lost. It is someone being removed. Removed precisely, cleanly, without mess, without trace, and worse, watched before disappearing. It is not an accident. It is not wild nature. It is something else. The Bitterroot Valley has this history. Disappearances without logic. Events that leave only questions, people who do not come back, and places that refuse to say what they saw. What makes this case an anchor of the supernatural in the missing 411 series is exactly this. The little that is known, the little. But it is enough. An unnamed mass, a fleeing herd, and a man of he who is no longer there. What is worse, not knowing what took that man, or knowing it might still be nearby, that might still be there, waiting, choosing, and that the forest always returns the silence, but never the ones who vanish. 6 people disappeared in Bitterroot. Nothing was found. No bodies, no clues, no answers. We're not talking about ancient legends. We're talking about recent cases, documented, investigated, unexplained. What is happening there? You decide what to believe. If this mystery gave you chills, leave a like. There's much more coming. And don't forget, the next disappearance could be happening right